So I'm going to go to 2.8. Probably gone a little bit fast, so I'll just take my ISO back down to 800. Always take the lens cap off. It's always the most embarrassing moment when you teach a class and you've got it on. Okay, so hopefully I've guessed the exposure right, so I'm going to just aim it in front here. And so there we go. The exposure's pretty much perfect. It's hard to see back there, you're just going to have to take my word for it. So I have got ISO 800, a 15th of a second, and f2.8. So when we work out the stops, and I'll have to do that very quickly, so from 1/25th I've gone down to 60th, 30th, 15th, so I've gone 3 stops down on my shutter speed, and then from f16 I've gone down to 2.8, so that's f11, 8, 5.6, 4, 2.8, so I've gone down 8 stops already, but I've also gone up 3 stops in my ISO. So it's actually 11 stops underexposed this room here than it would be outside on a bright sunny day. Now that's one thing that tells us how fantastic our eyes are. Our eyes have an amazing ability to go much further than what any digital. I'll answer any questions later, sir. Okay. Our eyes are able to adjust a lot more than what our cameras are able to do. Let's test it. I'm going to put it on program mode. I'm going to keep it on the ISO. I'm going to see what the camera is going to tell me. Camera's pretty close. It went up to a 20th, so maybe I underexposed it by about a third, but that's pretty good. If you practice in manual as much as you are able to, you will get better and better at your overall photography because you'll be able to see the light a little bit more and you'll be able to override any camera functions if need be. Now I did that without the flash. I do have the flash with me. I'm only going to spend a little bit of time on flash because I like to use as less flash as possible. Now with this picture here I don't actually need to use flash too much because I don't have any windows that are overexposed. I don't have any very dark areas that I have to worry about lighting. So in this room here it's fine to shoot at those settings. If I did have a bank of windows just along there, then the outside will be overexposed by easily 11 stops. So you would get no information whatsoever out there. What I would do here is I'd probably come back a couple of exposures and then use a bit of fill flash to fill the, I'll probably only end up filling the front rows of people. In the back it start to get a little bit dark. Now that's where it gets a little bit hard with regards to the overall picture, and when you've got different lighting conditions and you've got shadow and light, it gets quite hard. Now I am going to borrow that pattern there. I'm going to show you one thing now. If I can find it.
Thank you so much.
If I can find. Can I get you to stand up here just for a second? I'm going to place you in a lighting area. Okay, now I want you to look straight ahead.
Thank you.
Okay, now we can see that this part, keep looking forward, this part of his face is nicely lit. When we come around here, this part of his face is not. One thing we can do to fix this is this. It might be hard for the people that I'm hiding the paper, but people over here can see that I've actually just introduced some light onto his face to help brighten it. That's one way of doing it, but that's only good if you've got an assistant with you. Oh, that was yours, wasn't it? You can have a seat again. Obviously this piece of paper didn't perhaps reflect as much light back as possible, but if we have a large reflector, you can imagine that any light coming over this side will get spilled back over to this. Now I have a feeling I'm going to have to shift everyone to the back of the room there because it looks like this room is double booked. Or not. Have you got something at, what time have you got something? 11:30. Okay, I'm going to move everyone into the back room. We're going to push those players out of the way. I've adjusted to you, then I'm getting a very bright area here. That's how good our eyes are. These cameras are nowhere near as good as that. So I'm going to use the settings that I know is correct there. I have to adjust it because there is a little bit of daylight coming into this room now, and it's probably the equivalent of 5 stops daylight coming in here than what we had in that other room. So I'm going to adjust. I'm going to see if I'm correct. to take it up to 5.6, which is going 2 stops up from 2.8. Then from 15th, I'm going to go to 125th, and I hope that if I photograph this gentleman here, that my exposure should be okay. Okay, pretty much off there by maybe 2 stops. I'll take the shutter speed back down. Okay, now what I get is I get a nicely exposed, well, a relatively exposed table next to him. His face is actually quite dark. The outside exposure, if I focus out there, it's horribly overexposed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to overexpose the outside by 2 stops, which this digital camera can deal with, especially if I'm shooting RAW. And so I'm going to hopefully expose the rest of the inside room with with flash. Now, one of the things I can do with this is I can spread the light around by doing this. Front on flash is fine, you'll be sending the flash straight ahead. The problem is you get these horrible nasty shadows just in behind the heads, and there's not really too much we can do about it unless you start to spread the light around. So this thing here is very similar to the white piece of paper that I held up, that is actually spreading the light in a more even manner. Some of it is actually going straight up. It's a brown roof, so not much of it is coming back down to reflect, but a little bit of light will be going in the desired direction. So I'm going to take it to f8, 60th of a second, and bring my ISO back down to 200. Okay, now with the flash, if you've got a mounted flash, you've got a lot more capabilities than with the onboard flash. With this thing here, I can actually adjust this flash as much as I want, so that I can actually fine tune it a little bit more. If your flash has a little plus or minus button next to the dial, you can adjust it as well. A lot of the SLRs with the pop-up flash, there'll be a button right here where you can adjust the flash by holding it down and then flicking the button here. Now if I take a photograph of this gentleman here, I'm going to put my flash up a little bit stronger, 1 stop over, and hopefully, okay, maybe 3 stops over. Again, it's half a guessing game. When I guess it right, I look great. When I don't guess it right, then it happens. Now, there is a way to cheat, and I'm going to show you that now, because I can't get the exposure right because my guessing is all right. Put it onto program mode. I'm still going to have my flash 3 stops overexposed, so the camera's going to say, it's going to do all the work apart from the flash that's already doing its own thing. So if I photograph this gentleman here, then the camera wants to overexpose it. Okay, so I now have the perfect exposure, and it's actually f60, 3.5 of an f-stop, and I had that on 800 ISO. So I now have a picture where I have this gentleman pretty much nicely exposed. I have the background with a little bit of detail. It's two stops underexposed, but if you've got a raw file editor, you can actually go in and just deal with one small area to bring back the exposure. Okay, so that's basically the rules on exposures. Very brief. Does anyone have any questions about the overall exposure and the rules of it? Yes.
You mentioned RAW.
Yes.
What is that?
Okay, now almost all of our cameras are shooting and they're storing the picture as a JPEG, which is a compressed file. Basically what it is, if you've got an 8 megapixel camera, the camera will take an 8 megapixel photo. But then what the computer inside the camera will do, it'll say, with regards to this table, these 2 areas of white, or they're actually looking a little bit yellow, are very similar, so we're going to call it the same colour. So we've saved 1 kilobyte of memory. So your 8 megapixel picture might end up being saved on your card as, say, a 1 megapixel picture. With regards to a raw photo, what a raw photo does is it takes all of the picture, takes all of the exposure information, and then it captures a little bit more. So your so my 23 meg CCD, it actually takes around about a 25